On a quiet December night, paramedics rushed to a Florida home, only to be greeted by a sight that would haunt them forever. A young girl, just 11 years old, lay lifeless, her small body bound, her spirit crushed by the very people meant to protect her. In this video, we'll uncover the shocking details of her final moments, the horrifying abuse she endured, and the justice that followed. Stay with us as we delve into the tragic end of Melissa Stoddard. It was around 10 p.m. on the 12th of December 2012 when paramedics in Sarasota, Florida, were called to a home where it was reported that a young girl had stopped breathing. When they arrived, it quickly became apparent that the case was much more complex than the caller had portrayed. The home the paramedics were reporting to was located on the 9000 block of Delft Road, and it belonged to Kenneth Stoddard, who lived there with his wife, Misty Stoddard, and their children, who ranged in age between 4 and 15. The young girl that had stopped breathing was Kenneth's 11-year-old daughter from a prior relationship, Melissa Stoddard. According to Misty that evening, Melissa had been upset, and she refused to go to bed. She said that she gave Melissa some nighttime medicine and then sent her back to bed, where she quietened down. However, Misty said that when she checked on Melissa sometime later, she found her unconscious and not breathing, so she called 911. Paramedics entered the secluded home and were taken into the living room, where they found Melissa laying on her back. She wasn't breathing. Kenneth was still on the phone with 911 as paramedics entered. He was being guided through chest compressions, holding the phone with one hand and performing the chest compressions with the other. As the paramedics got closer, they could see that there were marks on Melissa's arms. Some of them were fresh, while others appeared to be older. What struck them as odd was that Melissa wasn't wearing pajamas. It was late in the night, and she was wearing jean shorts and a long-sleeve shirt. There was also duct tape on her wrists and ankles. The paramedics took over the chest compressions while Kenneth and Misty stood nearby. The rest of the children were all watching the disturbing scene, and one of them, just an 8-year-old girl, stood there screaming. The paramedics asked Kenneth and Misty to get the children out of the living room, but they just stood there with a glazed expression on their faces. The two paramedics found the Stoddards' behavior peculiar. They both kept getting in the way as the paramedics were desperately trying to revive Melissa. They were reluctant to provide medical information, and the paramedics couldn't help but feel that the concern they were expressing for Melissa's welfare was not genuine. Not once did they beg the paramedics to rescue Melissa, and there were really no comments that would associate the couple with being concerned for Melissa's welfare. CPR attempts were unfruitful. Paramedics put Melissa onto a stretcher and rushed outside to the awaiting ambulance. As one of the paramedics climbed inside the ambulance, he noticed that there was a rolled-up piece of duct tape stuck to his leg. He thought nothing of it, brushed it off, and they sped to Doctors Hospital in Sarasota. Doctors were attempting to save Melissa's life as the paramedics filled out their report. Kenneth pulled a chair up outside the room, and the paramedics got the impression that he was trying to eavesdrop on them. The paramedics couldn't help but feel as though Kenneth was scared as opposed to concerned. The two paramedics had been in the field for years, and they had dealt with many cases that involved children. Kenneth certainly wasn't eliciting the emotions of a parent that they had come accustomed to in their line of work. At the hospital, Melissa's heart began to beat again. By this point, however, her heart had stopped beating for almost an hour. Her brain was swollen from the lack of oxygen, and she was suffering from severe brain damage. She was transported to All Children's Hospital in St. Petersburg, where she was classified as brain dead. Much like the paramedics who responded to the scene, the doctors at the hospital noticed that Melissa had ligature marks on her upper arms, wrists, ankles, and thighs. It was also abundantly clear that she was severely underweight. She was 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighed only 88 pounds. It was also recorded by doctors that there were stitches above Melissa's left eye and lacerations on her wrists that were still fresh and bleeding. She had a broken left hand, a mark on her neck, and bruises on her buttocks and thighs that looked as though she had been beaten with a belt. Her feet were swollen and bruised, and the skin was peeling off her wrists. Upon informing police of this disturbing revelation, they went and spoke with Kenneth and Misty. Kenneth and Misty would both claim to police that sometimes Melissa needed to be restrained because of behavioral issues. They said that she was autistic and would be restrained to protect both herself and her other siblings. Kenneth went on to say that they would bind Melissa's wrists to her ankles in a hog-tied fashion. He would use shoelaces, tie strings, Velcro straps, tape, and other bindings. The binding marks on Melissa's thighs, wrists, and ankles were quite deep, and Kenneth revealed that they were caused by a tie-down that was used to bind Melissa's legs together. When police went back to speak to the couple, Misty provided a different version of events from the one she had told paramedics. She was now claiming that when she went to check on Melissa and found her unresponsive, she simply believed that she was faking it, so she left the room. She said that she returned sometime later and discovered that Melissa wasn't faking it at all, that she was actually unconscious, so she called for help. It was noted by police that when they spoke with Misty in particular, she showed no sign of being upset. Living with Melissa at the home were 5 other children. Police suspected that Kenneth and Misty were being untruthful, so they spoke to some of the children in the home to build a picture of what life was like for Melissa. They revealed a very disturbing portrait. The children said that Melissa was routinely tied up by Kenneth and Misty as a punishment, and that they would put duct tape over her mouth to stop her from screaming and crying. They went on to reveal that the couple would tie Melissa to a wooden board, where she would remain for long periods of time. Melissa's siblings all said that Melissa had been tied to the board when she became unresponsive. Her 15-year-old brother told police that he had helped Misty remove the wooden board from Melissa's bedroom before the ambulance arrived and then went to get some scissors to help Misty cut the tape off the board. He then helped his father, Kenneth, dispose of 2 wooden boards in the woods across the road from the home. Police were able to recover the 2 wooden boards, and alongside them, they also found a helmet that had been fashioned with restraints and several rolls of duct tape. The wooden boards had blood, hair, and fecal matter stuck to them. Melissa's siblings detailed more horrific abuse that she had endured. Sometimes, when she wasn't tied to the board, she would be tied to her bed. She wasn't allowed to eat inside with the rest of the family. Instead, Melissa was fed in a fenced spot outside, which the children referred to as the coral. On occasion, Melissa would be tied up and put inside the swimming pool. Despite the fact that Melissa had a bedroom, she would also be forced to sleep out in the coral on a filthy mattress. At night, she was strapped to the wooden board. Her bedroom was extremely sparse. There was a bare blue mattress on the floor and pink Dora the Explorer curtains. There were no sheets on the bed and nothing to indicate that this was a child's bedroom, other than the cartoon curtains. Melissa's 4-year-old stepsister told police that when Melissa misbehaved, her arms would be taped and she would receive harsh punishments. Her 5-year-old stepbrother recollected how Melissa would be bound and left outside while the rest of the family ate inside. He added that after Melissa was tied up and placed in the swimming pool, she would be tied up in her wet clothing in her bedroom. He chillingly said to police, "Every day, she is tied morning and nighttime." He revealed that when Melissa was allowed to sleep inside, she would be bound to the bed. Their 10-year-old stepsister told police that Melissa would be forced to sit outside with her arms duct taped. She was made to sit on the floor so that nobody could see her. She said that Melissa often had duct tape over her face to keep her quiet, adding that she was often restrained on the wooden board. While Misty claimed that Melissa had simply stopped breathing after she went to bed, the other children in the home provided a more ominous version of events from that night. They said that Melissa was wearing the helmet as her legs and arms were hog-tied in a 4-point restraint. Duct tape was placed over her mouth, and she was placed in a closet in her bedroom. For a moment, the room fell silent, and then the siblings could hear screaming. They said that Misty went into the bedroom with a belt, threatened Melissa, and shouted at her to keep quiet. Once again, Melissa fell silent. When the siblings were asked why Melissa could have fallen silent, they suggested that Misty duct-taped her mouth, which she did quite often. Later, when Misty went into the bedroom for one final time, Melissa was unconscious. Police obtained a search warrant for the home, where they found wads of used duct tape inside and in an outside area that the other children in the home referred to as the timeout area. Unfortunately, after 5 days in the hospital, it was decided that Melissa's life support should be turned off. Even if she were to have survived, she would never breathe or eat without the help of a machine. She was pronounced dead at 5:39 a.m. on the 17th of December. Her organs were harvested so that they could save the life of another child just like her. Her autopsy determined that she had died from hypoxia, which is caused by the deprivation of adequate oxygen supply. 2 days after Melissa died, Kenneth was arrested and charged with aggravated child abuse with great bodily harm. Following his arrest, Misty, who was pregnant, attempted to take her own life. She was hospitalized and subsequently arrested and charged with aggravated child abuse with great bodily harm. The Department of Children and Families took custody of the 5 other children who lived at the home. The arrests led to a plethora of questions. How did nobody notice that Melissa was being treated so horrifically at home? As it transpired, Melissa hadn't been attending school. She had earlier been enrolled at Oak Park School in Sarasota for children with developmental disabilities. Melissa was mildly autistic, and she didn't always speak in full sentences. She also had ADHD and was taking trazodone, which is a drug used to treat anxiety and depression. However, in the 3 weeks leading up to Melissa's death, she hadn't been attending school. Life for Melissa wasn't always this tragic. Before moving to Florida, Melissa had lived with her mother, Lisa Stoddard, in Green Bar, North Carolina. In North Carolina, Melissa was never restrained or forced to wear a helmet. According to Lisa, while Melissa had certain problems, she was never destructive or self-destructive. When she needed to be disciplined, Lisa would put Melissa in a timeout and make her count to 10, continuing until she had calmed down. This method had worked well for Lisa. Lisa and Kenneth had met at Camp Lejeune, where they were both serving in the Marine Corps. Lisa was training as an electrician, while Kenneth was an artilleryman. They were married in 1998, and in 2001, Melissa was born. Much like her older brother, who was born 20 months before her, Melissa was diagnosed with autism. Unfortunately, the marriage didn't last, and when Melissa was 5 years old, Lisa and Kenneth divorced. Kenneth then reconnected with Misty, an old high school friend, and they relocated to Florida, leaving Melissa with her mother and brother in North Carolina. As a young girl, Melissa was enrolled at McIver Education Center on Summit Avenue in North Carolina. Melissa certainly did have her own problems, including a hot temper and tantrums. Because of her autism, she struggled to communicate with others. While attending school at McIver, Melissa excelled in physical education and swimming. At McIver, each child had an individual educational plan, and they used positive behavioral support. This routine was perfect for Melissa. She knew what was expected, and her teachers all said that she became a different child. Gone were the temper tantrums, and in their place was a child who was said to be a teacher's dream. Teachers could also tell that Melissa was well cared for by her mother. She always looked clean and tidy, and she loved her food, though she was a picky eater. In 2007, Melissa went to Florida to spend some time with her father, Kenneth. It was apparent that, at some point, Melissa had been exposed to sexual abuse, according to a DCF report. In 2012, Melissa's life would change forever. She had been visiting Kenneth and Misty in Florida with her older brother when Misty walked into the bedroom and saw Melissa hiding under the covers while her brother was pulling up his trousers. Melissa had just been sexually abused by her older brother. He was 13 years old at the time, and he admitted to what he had done. Misty's own daughter then revealed that the teenage boy had abused her 3 times as well. Melissa's brother was arrested and charged with 1 felony count of lewd and lascivious conduct. The boy was deemed not competent for the case to proceed. Lisa was given an ultimatum. Melissa and her older brother could not remain under the same roof, so it was decided that Melissa would move to Florida to live with Kenneth, Misty, and their 5 children. Misty wanted to protect her daughter and had no cause for concern while she was married to Kenneth. There were never any issues. She said Kenneth had always been a really good father, both for their children and for Misty's daughter. He certainly hadn't restrained or abused the children in the past. As for Misty, Lisa said that she had only met her once and never had any interaction with her, despite the fact that she and Kenneth had been together for 9 years. While Misty had the surname Stoddard, she was actually married to another man. Although they had long been separated, they had never actually gotten a divorce. Misty had her own problems as well. She had given birth to a fifth child and had been suffering from postpartum depression. Lisa agreed to allow Melissa to go and live with Kenneth, Misty, and the rest of the children in September of 2012. The Stoddard family moved into the secluded home on Delft Road around the same time that Melissa moved in with them. The change was difficult for Melissa. She had spent the past 6 years living with just her mother and her older brother. Now she had 5 other siblings, a stepmother, and a father whom she didn't see that often. For a child with autism, it's difficult to navigate through a new environment. All the new noises, lighting, clothing, and people, everything is magnified for a child with autism. And there was no doubt that the transition would have been really hard on Melissa. Moreover, Melissa was removed from the setting she had come to know and love and was enrolled at Oak Park School. There, her teacher said that Melissa loved arts and crafts. She also really enjoyed anything that involved singing or dancing. From the moment Melissa arrived in Florida, she was treated differently than her step-siblings. In addition to being forced to eat outside, she was also forced to eat different foods than the rest of the family. Kenneth and Misty put Melissa on a strict and gluten-free diet, which they believed would help with her autism. They enforced this diet at Oak Park School too, where Melissa ate chicken and raw carrots every day, despite the fact that she didn't like them. Melissa showed progress at Oak Park School, much like she had done in North Carolina. When she first came to school, she threw chairs and ran around the classroom, much like she had done in North Carolina when she first started school. Teachers said that her aggression was triggered by almost anything. Despite this, her tantrums never included Melissa harming herself or anybody else. Over time, however, Melissa really had begun to improve. Her communication skills were developing, and she was able to tell people what specific toy she wanted to play with, and could tell people that she was hungry. After a while, Melissa began to miss school. Starting at the beginning of November, she missed 6 days of school, returned for 1 day, and then missed the next day before returning for 1 more day. Kenneth and Misty thought that Melissa was being given forbidden food at the school, despite the fact that staff denied this. A meeting was held where it was suggested that Melissa see a school psychiatrist and a behavioral specialist. The last day that Melissa attended school was the 15th of November. Staff at Oak Park School made contact with the family to try and arrange a meeting to inquire as to where Melissa was. The family ignored all attempts to make contact. There was a guidance counselor who'd become very concerned about Melissa's well-being. She went to the family's home, but Misty refused to open the door. She informed the guidance counselor that Melissa was with her father, and they were displeased the school was not adhering to Melissa's strict diet, despite the fact the school contended that they were. In addition to being cut off from school, Melissa was also cut off from her mother. The phone calls between Lisa and Melissa had become less frequent before becoming non-existent. Meanwhile, back at the home, somebody had been using the internet to search for how to deal with a violent and destructive child, or how to discipline a child that did not care. The search terms continued with somebody researching sociopathic tendencies, and if it was possible for a child with autism to be extremely manipulative. Then the search terms became more sinister. On the 18th of November, somebody had Googled sleep aids, followed by how to restrain a child at night. After Thanksgiving, somebody had searched for medication for psychopaths, and then, where can I buy long Velcro straps? A week before paramedics were called to the home, there was a search term for best gag to keep somebody quiet, and human muzzle. On the 1st of December, Kenneth purchased a 4x8 sheet of plywood and then returned to the same store the following week to purchase 4 black Velcro straps and a landscape timber. He purchased 3 rolls of duct tape from Lowe's, and there was surveillance footage to show that it was Kenneth, as opposed to Misty. Melissa had completely fallen through the cracks. She had been cut off from everybody except for those who lived inside the home with her. The abuse had been prolonged, but there was nobody to step in for Melissa. There was nobody to see the bruises across her body and face, and nobody had witnessed the lacerations from the restraints. Then there was a neighbor who, for around 3 months, had heard the sounds of slapping, curse words coming from a woman, and a girl crying coming from inside the Stoddard home. These noises were always heard at night, and the neighbor, Kevin Dermody, said to police that they were so terrible he did consider calling 911. He said that he had his finger on the call button but then decided not to do anything, as he feared the police would come out, not do anything, and then the child might have been harmed even more. While the details of the abuse and neglect were horrific, the world would soon get an even more disturbing insight into Melissa's tragic life. Police had obtained a search warrant for Kenneth and Melissa's computer, as well as their camera and cell phone. The couple had documented the abuse that was inflicted on Melissa. There was one video that was taken at night when it was very dark. Melissa could be seen kneeling on the concrete slab in the yard. She was looking into the laundry room where Misty was standing with a video camera. One of her step-siblings can be heard questioning, "Why can't she just go away? Why is she crying?" Melissa begged to come inside the home before wailing. She was throwing her arms in the air and kicking her legs. Her pleas fell on deaf ears as Misty continued to videotape her stepdaughter. After a while, Melissa gave up. Her spirit was completely broken as she fell silent, lifted up her hands, and then buried her head in her hands. The video was recorded just weeks before Melissa finally died. There were other videos recorded by Misty and Kenneth. In an earlier video that was filmed during the day, Melissa can be seen on a concrete slab in the yard. Her arms are bound behind her, and she is barely moving. She stares straight ahead, tilts her head, and then glances up towards the sky. There's dried blood on her nose and a makeshift bandage on her head made from a towel and a washcloth. This video was taken just a couple of hours before Melissa was taken to the hospital, where she received stitches for a head injury. Kenneth and Misty claimed that Melissa had received the head injury from bashing her own head off the wall. The staff at the hospital believed the couple and didn't think to report the suspicious injury. In the new year, the charges against Misty were elevated, and she was charged with first-degree murder. In announcing the new charges, prosecutor Karen Fravelig said the state believed this was the appropriate charge. Kenneth's defense attorney, Eric Bersinger, said that his client was innocent and that Misty was the ringleader. He said that there was a reason the state hadn't filed any more charges against Kenneth as well. He portrayed his client as a father who was inundated with work, spending up to 70 hours a week at a bookstore that he managed. He said Kenneth had trusted Misty to watch their children while he was at work, adding that he hadn't been the one to restrain Melissa on the night of the final attack. Defense attorney Bersinger said his client was distraught about Melissa's death, arguing that the biggest punishment is that his daughter is dead. It was kind of ironic, considering Kenneth was the one who purchased most of the items that were used to restrain his daughter. In addition to the 5 other children they were raising, Misty had just given birth to another behind bars. Before the end of May, 2 additional felony charges of aggravated manslaughter and tampering with evidence would be filed against Kenneth. It was then decided that Misty would be standing trial first, and it was scheduled for June of 2014. By the 23rd of June, the jury was seated and opening statements were presented. It quickly became apparent that Misty and her defense team were going to try and place the blame for Melissa's death directly on Kenneth. Defense attorney Mark Brewer noted during his opening statements that Kenneth was the one who purchased the plywood board, fixing it up so that Melissa could be restrained to it. And then he was the one who discarded it before paramedics arrived. The prosecution, on the other hand, would detail how Melissa had been tortured and abused by Kenneth and Misty in the lead-up to her death. Prosecutor Karen Freeflich said Melissa Stoddard moved in here in the late summer of 2012, and she was dead less than 5 months later. She said that it was Misty who'd covered Melissa's mouth with duct tape and then left her alone to suffocate in the bedroom. She said that Misty was more preoccupied with concealing evidence than calling 911 or taking Melissa to the hospital. The jury was sent off to deliberate and returned with a verdict just less than 2 hours later. They found Misty Stoddard guilty of first-degree murder and aggravated child abuse. The judge sentenced Misty to life in prison without the possibility of parole, with an additional 30 years for the aggravated abuse charge. The following month, Kenneth was convicted of aggravated manslaughter, aggravated child abuse, and tampering with evidence. During his trial, prosecutor Susan O'Donnell said that Melissa was difficult and different, and that she was targeted by both Kenneth and Misty. She said that the couple removed Melissa from school so that they could not find out about the abuse being inflicted on her at home. During his sentencing phase, the judge addressed him stating, "The single most important duty of a parent is to protect their child. You failed miserably. Not only did you fail, but you added to her torture." The judge struggled to hold back tears as he highlighted an interview with Kenneth in which he was asked why Melissa didn't struggle when she was restrained. Kenneth had replied, "She trusted her daddy." The judge sentenced Kenneth Stoddard to 65 years in prison, which was the maximum. That's all in this file. Please be sure now to watch another video and of course press on screen to subscribe to my channel now because you wouldn't want to miss what's next. And I'll see you next time.